There is a ton of research that supports the idea that the public, all our various stakeholders, expect companies to do more with their profits than simply provide an adequate return on investment to shareholders. Different stakeholder groups, this includes prospective employees, investors, even shareholders, expect companies to use the money they make and the influence they wield to do social good. That's why companies take such a beating when they're seen doing precisely the opposite. Take a look at Turing Pharmaceuticals and their poster child, the CEO Martin Shkreli, who increased the price of a life-saving drug by more than 5,000%. He's now facing charges. And we have Heather Bresch, the CEO at Mylan Pharmaceuticals, which increased the price of the epi-pen so far by 400%, while at the same time her own salary increased by 600%. And it's been revealed since all of this came about, with patients posting their dissatisfaction and their distress on Facebook, and that got the attention of activists, patient activists, and parent activists. It was revealed that the board of directors has created a provision that will provide a huge one-time bonus to the top 100 executives in the organization if they can double the share price by 2018. This kind of reaction isn't isolated to pharmaceutical companies, by the way. Exxon-mobil is taking a real beating over the investigation by the Los Angeles Times and Inside Climate News that found that they had scientific evidence about the impact of carbon-based emissions on the planet's climate as early as the 1970s and engaged in a massive cover-up to keep that information from getting out so that they could continue to make money. It's this kind of behavior that led Robert Phillips, the former president of Edelman EMEA, to write a book titled "Trust Me, PR is Dead." He argued that PR is really nothing more than spin to try to make this kind of behavior look good, and that when companies start behaving like corporate citizens in the world, you won't need PR because the company's positive, beneficial actions will speak for themselves. I did a review of this book. You'll have a link to that in the show notes for this video, that took exception to Robert's conclusions. I think an organization does need PR even when it's doing great stuff, and I think PR does a lot more than simply address the issues that the company is facing. But I had no problem with his underlying premise that companies really need to respond to the growing expectation of their various publics that we are going to use our money and our leverage for improving social and environmental conditions in the world. Now, I saw this demonstrated in my very first job in the corporate world. It was with Arco. I started there with the employee communications team in 1977, which was 4 years after the CEO, Robert O. Anderson, and the president, Thornton Bradshaw, called for the elimination of the oil depletion allowance. This was a tax credit that had been around for 50 years, essentially allowed oil companies to write off 30% of their income based on the fact that once they had sucked oil out of the ground, they couldn't suck it out of the ground again. Once it was used, and it made oil companies a lot of money. It also allowed oil companies to keep the price of gasoline artificially low. Now, Arco stood alone in this position. The rest of the oil industry thought Arco was nuts. They loved the oil depletion allowance. The company took a real beating from the members of the American Petroleum Institute and the Western Oil and Gas Association, which really wanted to cling to that depletion allowance. But it had a tremendous impact on the public perception of the organization. The coverage the company got, for example, I remember a cover of the old magazine New West that positioned Arco as the maverick oil company. And when public opinion polls were taken during the great oil crisis, you remember that, when the lines at the gas station could take hours before you could fill up, and you could only pump gas on odd or even days based on the last number on your license plate. Well, the public listed the companies they thought were to blame, and Arco didn't make the list, despite the fact that Arco's profits during the oil crisis were among the highest of all of the oil companies. But Arco had achieved this public position as being one of the good guys, and as a result, nobody blamed Arco for the problems that people were encountering just filling up their tanks so they could drive to work. ARCO was even very public about its recognition of the PR benefits of calling for the elimination of the oil depletion allowance. The company's executive vice president, Bill Kieschnick, who went on to later become the CEO, said that he knew the Congress was taking very anti-oil industry positions and that ARCO standing up for the little guy in this regard was going to stand very well in terms of its reputation. And he said so in a piece from 1973 that was written by the LA Times Washington Post organization. Now, I raise all of this because we're seeing something very similar from another one of my former employers. I went to work for Allergan in 1990, and I left in 1993. I was director of corporate communications, so I don't know any of the current management in the organization, but I got to give huge kudos to Brent Saunders, the CEO at Allergan, for the social contract with patients that he published on his CEO blog. Now, when I was at Allergan, we dealt with controversy over pharmaceutical pricing pretty much the same way every other pharmaceutical company did. I'm sure you've heard these arguments before. It takes 10 years to bring a drug to market. You have to patent the drug as soon as you recognize it as a viable, potential marketable drug. So much of the patent has already gone by the time you bring it to market. You only get 2, 3, 4 years of a patent's life to make money off the drug before competitors can come in with generic versions. Not only that, but you're also paying for the 99 drugs that never made it to market, for all of the research and development on those drugs, which may fall out of the process during clinical trials or other stages of a drug's development. All of that has to be paid for with the profits from the one drug out of 100 that actually does make it to market. And we kept pitching these arguments while people were choosing dog food over human food so they could afford their medications. And Congress and other political leaders were talking about this. So I am really excited about what Brent Saunders has done. It's very consistent with what stakeholders are calling on organizations to do. Now, Allergan's contract with patients addresses things like innovation and investment, education, and some other factors, but it's really the access and pricing that has captured the attention of the media, a lot of attention from the media. He has committed to pricing products no more than the value they deliver to patients and never increasing prices more than single digit and more than once a year and never more than just a little bit more than the rate of inflation. He's also said that if they have a major price increase, it will always be tied to increases in costs to produce the drug, and they will demonstrate that they have experienced this increase in cost to produce the drug. As for Shkreli and Bresh, Saunders has referred to these folks as outliers, and he said their outrageous price increases are contributing to a decline in the amount of investment that is available for the discovery of life-saving and life-enhancing drugs. So he's calling them out and separating Allergan from that pack of pharmaceutical organizations. I really wish I were doing PR for Allergan today, because how often does a PR person get this kind of story to tell? And it's a story that's resonating. You can see that by the kind of coverage it's getting from major organizations and the hundreds of stories that are being written about this. Once upon a time, it was true that organizations could reap huge profits while being dicks. That's just not the case anymore. It pays today to be the good guy. It is incumbent upon public relations to counsel the leadership of the organization about the expectations of our stakeholders, that we are expected to produce social justice and contribute to social causes and to environmental causes. This is what the Melbourne Mandate says. It's what we should stand for, and it's really heartening to see more organizations doing this sort of thing, especially organizations I have a personal connection with.